Hi everybody. Good evening.
Good evening.
Let me ask you something before I start to know more or less. Well, thank you for coming. This after lunchtime, some people were having naps, and you are here, so this is good. Thank you.
谢谢，欢迎大家来哈，因为已经刚吃完午餐，可能有人去睡觉，但是还是谢谢大家来。他会先问大家一个问题。
So let me ask you to know a little bit your knowledge about the thing that we're going to talk about. How many of you are in scouting or know a lot about scouting?
你们多少人是参加童子军，或者是知道童子军运动是什么的？请举手哈。
That's good. That's good. That's interesting. So I want to suggest something. Why don't you come here? Because if not, people is going to think that we're going to do like a tennis game.
好，那我们不要让你眼睛像打网球这样子看。
We're going to be like a couple of humorists, like a comedy club.
Okay.
So, well, I want to explain you a little bit about scouting, and I want to give you some insights that could make you think in a different way of what you imagine that scouting is.
我就先谈一下童子军，介绍一下，让你们可能会跟你们想象的童子军会有点不一样。
So I'm coming from Catalonia, in Barcelona. When you see someone dressed in the way that scouts are dressed here in Taiwan, it's something very strange. Probably goes to a custom party, because in my country scouts have only scarf. They use no uniform whatsoever.
那我来自的地方是西班牙的加泰隆尼亚这个地方，那我们的童子军是只有领巾，跟这边看到的童子军有穿制服是完全不一样的。
Now the question is, one day, a few months ago, I was invited to a conference on scouting at world level, and the person that was organizing it said, well, in the talk you should wear your scout uniform. And I said, I don't have scout uniform. She said, oh, did you forget it in your luggage? I said, no, actually in my country we don't have your scout uniform. I said, but is there association, scout association?
几个月以前我被邀请去参加一个世界性的童子军会议，那他就是主办人要求我就说你在这个场合你要穿制服，那可是我出现的时候只有领巾，那他就说你的制服呢，是你忘了吗？他说没有，他回答就说我们国家就是只有领巾这样。那你们真的是童子军吗
？So to understand a little bit of this, it is good to go back in history and try to understand what happened when this thing called scouting started in the early 20th century in England, which was the center of a big empire. The British Empire that had 1/4 of the world territories and 1/4 of the world population.
所以要了解这个，我们就回到童子军的起源就是上个世纪初，然后在英国，当时英国是最大的这个殖民国家，他们拥有1/4的这个全球的土地和1/4的人口。
So British at the beginning of the 20th century started to realize that this British Empire was not going to last. They were worried. They said, well, we need something to keep the empire going, and we need our people to be stronger and to be more proactive. And it was this member of the army who was 50 called Baden-Powell, who was kind of a hero for a little thing that he did, not very relevant, but they needed heroes. And he was expert on a particular technique for soldiers that was exploring.
那就是当时英国也开始觉得他们这个帝国大概不会永远继续这么强大，所以他们可能要找一些新的东西，怎么样锻炼他们的青少年更强壮更积极这些。那所以这个时候呢，他们就是有一位我们就是贝登堡先生，那他们就把他塑造成一个 个英国的一个大英雄，因为事实上他的战功其实并不是那么，就童子军来讲，并不是那么大，他只是守住一个城所以英国就把他视作一个大英雄，然后他发明了一个童子军这个东西。
So exploring is something that if you are a soldier in a very far away colony and you are from England, is very relevant because it decides if you survive or not. But when you are a kid, exploring are the techniques that you use when you are playing something in the forest and you try to hide and being behind a tree and you don't want the other to look at you. You want to be able to walk in a way that you don't crush something, or you want to do it in a way that you could say something to that one without the other one listening to you.
那这个就是就是他们在军队里头用的这个侦察术就是他像你们刚才看到他这些动作，怎么样躲起来不让敌人发现，然后你又可以跟跟别人沟通而不被别人知道，像这样的一个技巧是贝登堡先生非常在行的。
So Baden-Powell was an expert on that, and he actually wrote a very serious book on techniques on exploring that in English is called Scouting. And this book was published in 1899, but then in 1908 he was asked to do an adaptation for kids of that book, because he was so famous in that moment, he was a hero, as I said, that some teenagers took the formal, serious book and read it to try to find references on how to be a real explorer.
那像这样的侦探术就是贝登堡先生非常在行的，所以他为了军队的训练，他也写了一系列的像这样的一个书。那但是在大概1890年的时候他写了这些书，但后来在1907年的时候就是他为了小朋友，为了青少年写了像这样的一本书。后来这些英国的青少年就开始按照这书中所写的东西来模仿他。
Well, long story short, the thing is that he wrote this book called Scouting for Boys. And in this book he put different things. Some kind of dances that the Zulus dance in Africa, some kind of tale that happened in India, some stories of the Native Americans, the Indians in the United States, and also he put techniques of exploration of this kind of scouting thing. And he started to talk about imaginary characters that he called scouts. And he said, scouts dress in that way, scouts do this, scouts behave in that way. But those personages, those characters called scouts, in that moment really didn't exist.
那后来贝登堡就写了这本书叫《Scouting for Boys》，就是我们讲的童子警探，或者是那个童子军手册。但是这本书除了这些侦查事后的这个技巧之外他还放了很多比如说印度祖鲁人的战歌一些美国印第安的故事等等，像这样子。那甚至于他把书中的角色叫做童子军，可是事实上这个童子军是一个虚构的角色，因为当时还没有童子军，但是青少年就开始跟着模仿做这些事情。
So, are you familiar? If you are one of them, don't be ashamed. Are you familiar with these people that sometimes dress themselves in a Star Trek way?
大家对于就是 cosplay， 比如说你们会不会去模仿那个星际迷航舰他们这些外星人的穿着这些
So you know, it's when people that dress in a Star Trek, they do this kind of weird thing with the fingers, and when there is a film, they go there dressed in that way, and they gather. I don't know exactly what they talk about, but they do the Star Trek thing.
就是这个就是模仿这些首饰服装原力拿那个光剑这样挥来挥去像这样的事情大家都熟悉吧？
熟悉。Well, so what happened is that the book that Baden-Powell wrote was very successful. Many people buy it, and it first came in little like chapters, And then as a book, it was a success, everybody was buying it. And the editor, a year and a half after the book was published, decided to do a gathering of kids that were readers of the book. Because the kids started to write to the editor saying, hey, here in the book says that the Scouts had this kind of hat. Where could I buy a hat? So the editor started to create a little bit of merchandise. The same of the Star Trek. If people want hats, I'm going to sell hats. Hey, they said that Scouts have this guy's scarf. Well, I'm going to sell the scarf. Hey, they said that this hat is really thin. Well, I'm going to sell it.
我就简单说，就这个书出来，因为非常畅销，然后这个后来这个很多小孩就写信给出版商，哎，这书里头说有这个帽子啊，有这个徽章啊，有这个什么，哪里可以买得到？所以这个出版商啊，就开始成立一个小小的贩卖部来供应，说你要买帽子我就卖帽子给你，你要买制服就卖制服给你。然后后来他就开始办了一个第一次就是邀请这些应该是书迷吧，就办一个大集会，其实就是我们讲的水晶宫那次集合。
So they organized this gathering in 1910, so 1 year and a half after the book came, and for the surprise, remember that in that moment it was no television, no radio, no internet, no Facebook, no cell phones, and not even phones practically. So by the surprise of the editor, in the gathering appeared around 10,000 boys and girls dressed in the way that Baden-Powell was explaining in Scouting Programs.
所以我们要想象那个时候其实没有这个网络啊、大哥大，可是当场就来了1万多名的男生跟女生，就穿着像贝登堡书里头所讲的那个样子来集合，说我们是童子军。
So Baden-Powell decided, together with the public institutions of the moment, the Crown, the public school, even the army, that it would be a good idea to transform this sporadic action into something more stable. And the Boy Scouts Association was established a year later with the King of England as the patron.
那因为贝登堡看到这样的一个盛况，他觉得应该要就是说跟一些当时的英国的皇家政府，然后军队，还有一些就是来办一个英国的童子军总会来做这样。那当时的英国的国王是这个总会的一个会长，或者是名誉会长这样。
So in the following years, what happened surprisingly also is that the book was translated to many languages, and in many countries, it started to appear associations that call themselves Scouts in the same way that was happening in the UK with individuals that call themselves Scouts. And that happened in France, in Italy, it happened in Malaysia, in Chile, it happened in all the British Empire, it happened in all the French colonies. And during the First World War, that was from 1914 to 1918, it was already a big community of people in the world that identified themselves with this strange thing called Scouts.
那所以在1年之后就是因为这个书很畅销，然后也被翻译成各国的文字。那接着就好像这些青少年就穿得像童子军一样，所以像刚才提到法国、意大利、英国的殖民地、法国的殖民地，很多地方也成立了童子军总会，说他们是童子军。然后接下来就有这个一次大战的这个事情。
So during this decade, Baden-Powell had an evolution on 4 big things that are very relevant. One, he discovered that the thing that he was doing was much closer to what progressive education was saying. So the movements like the one of Maria Montessori saying that young people learn in a kind of different way that traditional teaching was saying. The second evolution was that he discovered that the army, you want to be something in one of these points?
You can finish it.
The second point was that he realized that what the army was doing, besides the military thing, was to prepare a group to act in the way that that the army wanted. So it wanted a group that act and behave in just a single way, whereas the scouting was looking for individuals that had critical thinking and capacity to decide what they wanted to do.
我们刚才讲就是说，差不多在1914年、1918年发生第4次世界大战时，各国也有蛮多的童子军运动。那但是就是在从这个我们刚才讲的1907年到1920年这之间呢，贝登堡大概在他的想法上有几个改变。那第一个改变啊，他觉得他做的啊，其实是跟当时的一些进步主义，比如说蒙特梭利所倡导的这个教育的一个方式啊，是弱和不接的，而是反而跟传统的这个学校教育的教写算啊这些是不一样的。我有多讲了一些啊，但是另外一个就是他觉得他所做的这个东西啊，是军队的话就是强调就是说他们就是按照长官的这个要求去执行这个任务去服从。但是他在童子军讲的啊，比较是希望这个童子军特别青少年能够有批判性的一个思考，或者是独立的一个判断这是贝登堡在这个过程之中所做的一个改变。
And the two other changes, evolutions, were to move from a patriotic point of view, the idea that the empire, the British Empire, should be perpetuated, to an internationalist view, the idea that there is no country better than another. And the fourth one is to move towards a clear idea that scouting was a tool, an explicit tool for peace building. On this last thing, there is one relevant element, which is the First World War.
那这里头的话，当然有另外第三个就是说，贝登堡他就是因为最早是对于英国殖民地的一个效忠这样的一个更狭窄的爱国主义，他觉得应该是要变成一种国际性的国际主义，就是说没有一个国家是比其他的国家要优秀要好，这是第三点。第四点，他就是说比较确认的童子军是要促进世界和平的一个工具。那当然在这中间产生这些影响啊，最主要还是因为第1次世界大战的一个造成贝登堡先生的这一些的改变。
So for you to understand the impact of the First World War in the mentality of a British scout, you have to think that 1 of every 10 people of your age in Britain was killed during the First World War.
那在1次世界大战的时候，大家可以想象，就是当时差不多像各位一样年纪就是每10个有1个人就是死于这个战争中。
So meaning that if you start counting, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You are gone. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You are gone.
再数10个你就死掉了。
So that means that everybody knew, young people, your friends, your cousin, your brother, that were killed in the war. So the legend, this magic thing of the soldiers of the frontiers that was so innocent, suddenly was transformed in the idea that the war has direct impact on the life of young people.
那本来我们就是说青少年学这个警探术啊、事后术、军队的这个东西啊，本来可能是一种美好的一种想象，可是现在实际战争发生了，你身边的亲友朋友就死掉了。
So in 1919, 1920. Both the British government and the American government promoted an idea that was that it should be created a society with all the nations in the world where conflicts could be solved through dialogue instead of doing it through war. And that was established in 1920, and it was called the League of Nations.
所以就是在1910年、1919、1920年的时候啊，英国跟美国开始想，是不是应该有一个国际的一个仲裁的机构？这个就是后来成立的国联。
So Belleville considered since the beginning that the Scout movement was kind of the youth group of the League of Nations, in the sense that Scouting was promoting the idea of active citizenship. And active citizens should be, in his view, active citizens of their direct community, but also active citizens of the world. That's why he said, all scouts from all the countries are together in the same way that all nations should be together in the League of Nations.
那他这边就是这个就造成贝登堡一个想法的一个转变，他就觉得我们应该培养童子军是一个积极的主动的一个公民。那这个公民的话，就是必须跟他的社区、跟他的社会、国家还有整个国际做一个联系这样子。
So let me on this clarify something about what's scouting about, what's the purpose of scouting, because probably what you see of scouting is kind of a static thing, way of dressing, some kind of activities, but the purpose of scouting goes much farther than this.
那所以我现在就是跟大家在解释童子军的这个目的到底是什么。你们可能只是看到童子军的一些表面的东西，比如说制服啊，或者是一些绳结啊、露营啊这些活动，但是它事实上应该有更深层的东西。
So, scouting is a movement that has as a purpose to contribute to the self-development of young people.
所以童子军是帮助青少年的一个自我的一个发展。
The idea of self-development is very relevant because traditionally school education had assumed that young people are like empty boxes that you have to fill with information.
那这个自我发展是对童子军是非常重要的，因为传统的学校的教育或观点就是说把